The smell of sawdust and betrayal hung thick in my basement workshop. Rain hammered against the windows of our historic brownstone in Port Standish, Maine, creating a rhythm that matched my growing paranoia, or what Mara called my paranoia anyway. I'm Brooks Carven, 42 years old, and I've spent the last 15 years building a successful commercial real estate business from nothing. Started with a hammer and a pickup truck, worked construction until my hands bled, then clawed my way into suits and boardrooms. But tonight, sitting in my half-finished basement at 2 a.m, I felt like I was back to square one. Mara's late work nights had become a pattern. 3 months of them, to be exact. My wife of 10 years, the sophisticated museum curator who could make a dusty pottery shard sound like the crown jewels, had been coming home later and later with increasingly creative excuses. The front door slammed upstairs. I heard her heels click across the hardwood, then pause. She was probably looking for signs of life, checking if the coast was clear. After a decade with me, she should know I'm a light sleeper. "Brooks?" Her voice drifted down the stairs, artificially casual. "You awake?" I didn't answer. Let her wonder. Her footsteps approached the basement door. When she appeared at the top of the stairs, rain-soaked and startled to see me hunched over my workbench, she fumbled for words. "Oh, I didn't expect... What are you doing down there so late?" Could ask you the same question. I didn't look up from the cabinet I was refinishing. "Museum close at midnight now?" We had a board meeting that ran long. Then Glenna wanted to grab drinks to discuss the new exhibition. The lies rolled off her tongue like she'd been practicing. You know how she gets when she's excited about a project. Right. Glenna Marsh, Mara's best friend and fellow art world queen bee. The woman who lived for gossip and had never met a secret she didn't want to spill. If Mara was really with Glenna, I'd have heard about it through the Port Standish rumor mill before she got home. "Glenna, huh?" I finally looked up, meeting her eyes. "She mention anything interesting?" Mara's face twitched. Just for a second, but I caught it. "Just work stuff. You wouldn't be interested." There it was. The subtle dismissal that had become her signature move. "You wouldn't understand, Brooks. It's too sophisticated for someone like you. Never mind that I'd built a multi-million-dollar business while she arranged pretty objects in glass cases." "Well," I said, turning back to my work, "glad you had fun." She lingered for a moment, probably trying to read my mood, then disappeared upstairs. I heard the shower start running. Washing off evidence, no doubt. The next morning brought the breakthrough I'd been dreading. Mara was at the museum, and I was fixing a jammed drawer in her antique desk when I found it. A second phone, hidden in the back corner behind old exhibition catalogs. My hands shook as I powered it on. The messages loaded slowly, each one another nail in the coffin of our marriage. Quinn: "Can't wait to see you tonight. Same place?" Mara: "Yes. Brooks is working late again. We have until midnight." Quinn: "Perfect. I've been thinking about you all day." The timestamps went back months. I scrolled through dozens of messages, each one more intimate than the last. But it was the photo that really got me. Mara and a man I recognized as Quinn Vossin, the hotshot architect whose face graced the business section of the Port Standish Herald regularly. They were in what looked like a hotel room, her head on his shoulder, both of them laughing at some private joke. Quinn Vossin, married father of 2. The golden boy of Port Standish's architectural scene, currently designing half the new developments in town, including the museum's planned expansion that Mara had been working on for the past year. I sat there in our bedroom holding the evidence of my wife's betrayal and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not heartbreak. I'd been expecting this for weeks. No, this was something else entirely. This was the feeling I got when I was about to demolish a building. That moment of calculation before you bring the whole thing down. I photographed every message, every photo, every location tag. Then I carefully placed the phone back where I'd found it and went downstairs to my workshop. That's where I set up my camera and recorded my first video diary entry. Day 1 of the demolition project, I said to the lens. If I can build a skyscraper, I can tear down a life. Monday morning found me in my downtown office, staring out at the construction cranes that dotted Port Standish's skyline. My assistant, Zane Morrison, knocked and entered with coffee and his laptop. 26 years old, MIT graduate, and the closest thing to a son I'd ever had. Kid could hack a toaster if you gave him 5 minutes and proper motivation. You look like hell, Brooks, he said, setting down the coffee. Rough weekend? You could say that. I took a sip and studied his face. Zane was loyal, but this was asking a lot. I need a favor, a big one. His eyebrows went up. Legal big, or we never had this conversation big? Legal, mostly. I pulled out a flash drive with copies of Mara's messages. I need you to dig into some financial records, cross-reference some hotel invoices, phone records, that sort of thing. Zane looked at the drive like it might bite him. This about Mara? Smart kid. She's having an affair. I need to know how deep it goes. He plugged in the drive and started scrolling. After a few minutes, he let out a low whistle. Quinn Vossin? Seriously? Guy's married to Reina Favren. You know her? Legal consultant. Handles contract disputes for half the construction companies in Maine. Scary smart, scary tough. Word is she once made a developer cry during a deposition. He looked up from the screen. You thinking about telling her? Maybe. But first, I want to know what we're dealing with. Can you trace their movements? Hotel stays, restaurant charges, that kind of thing? Zane's fingers flew over the keyboard. Give me a few hours. I'll see what I can find. While he worked, I drove across town to the Hammered Nail, the dive bar where Port Standish's construction crews and blue-collar workers gathered after hours. The owner, Benji Caruso, had been serving beer and gossip in equal measure for 20 years. If there were rumors about Quinn and Mara, he'd know about them. I found him restocking the bar, his massive frame making the beer cases look like toy blocks. Brooks Carven. He grinned and extended a hand that could crush walnuts. Haven't seen you in here for months. Business keeping you busy? Something like that? I ordered a beer even though it was barely noon. Benji, you hear much about Quinn Vossin lately? His expression shifted, becoming more guarded. The architect? Why you asking? Just curious. Heard his name around town. Benji leaned closer, lowering his voice. Funny you should ask. Word is his firm's about to land the biggest city contract in decades. New civic center, municipal building renovations, the works. We're talking $50 million. Easy. That's a lot of money. Sure is. Course, that's assuming nothing upsets the apple cart. City council's real particular about moral character these days. Ever since that scandal with the mayor's brother-in-law. I filed that information away. Any idea when the contract gets announced? Soon, real soon. Benji straightened up as another customer walked in. But hey, you didn't hear it from me, right? I finished my beer and headed back to the office, where Zane was waiting with a folder full of printouts. Your wife's been busy, he said without preamble. Hotel charges going back 6 months, always the same place, the Harbor View downtown, always paid for by Quinn's company credit card. Company card? Gets better. There's a wire transfer from Quinn's business account to Mara's personal account last month. $5,000, listed as consulting fees. I stared at the papers. Consulting on what? That's what I'd like to know. According to the museum's public records, Quinn's firm isn't even bidding on the expansion project. They're supposedly using Henderson and Associates. The pieces were starting to come together. Quinn was paying my wife for something, and it wasn't her expertise in ancient pottery. This was bigger than just an affair. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek Sullivan, my oldest friend and the best contractor in Port Standish. Beer tonight? Got some stories you'll want to hear? I texted back, Hammered Nail, 8 o'clock. Derek was waiting when I arrived, already 3 beers deep and wearing his trademark scowl. We'd known each other since high school, back when we were both swinging hammers for other people's dreams. He'd stuck with construction while I moved into the business side, but we'd remained close. If anyone knew the real story about Quinn Vossin, it would be Derek. "You look like someone pissed in your cornflakes," he said by way of greeting. "Rough few days. What's this story you wanted to tell me?" Derek glanced around the bar, then leaned closer. "It's about your boy Quinn. Word on the job sites is he's been cutting corners on the Riverside project. Cheap materials, shortcuts on the foundation work. Building inspectors been asking questions." "How bad are we talking?" "Bad enough that smart money says the whole thing gets condemned within 5 years. But here's the kicker. Quinn's been telling people he's got insurance. Some kind of inside information that'll keep him safe no matter what happens." I felt that cold feeling in my chest again. "What kind of inside information?" "Don't know for sure. But he's been bragging about having connections at the museum. Says he's got someone feeding him details about city planning meetings, zoning changes, that kind of thing. Someone at the museum. Someone with access to city planning information. Someone like my wife." I bought Derek another round and listened to him complain about permit delays and supply chain issues. But my mind was elsewhere, putting together a plan. If Quinn thought he could use my wife to cheat the system and humiliate me in the process, he was about to learn why you don't mess with someone who built his fortune by being smarter and tougher than everyone else. When I got home that night, Mara was already in bed, pretending to read a book about Renaissance sculpture. Her phone, the real one, not the burner, sat on the nightstand, screen dark. "How was your day?" she asked without looking up. "Productive," I said, heading for the bathroom. "Very productive." As I brushed my teeth, I could see her reflection in the mirror. She was watching me, probably trying to figure out if I suspected anything. Let her wonder. In a few days, wondering would be the least of her problems. 2 days later, I made the call that would change everything. Reina Favren's office was in a glass tower downtown, the kind of building that screamed success and intimidation in equal measure. Her secretary put me through after I mentioned Quinn's name. "Mr. Carven?" Her voice was crisp, professional. "I understand you wanted to discuss my husband. I think we should meet. There are things you need to know." A pause. "What kind of things?" "The kind that are better discussed in person. Are you free for coffee this afternoon?" Another pause, longer this time. "I'll be at Cafe Luna at 3. You'll recognize me from the photos in Quinn's office." She was right. Reina Favren was unmistakable, tall, elegant, with the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. She was already seated when I arrived, a legal pad and pen beside her coffee cup. This woman came prepared. "Mr. Carven." She stood and shook my hand with a grip that meant business. I'll be honest, I've been expecting a call like this for months. That caught me off guard. "You have?" "My husband isn't as careful as he thinks he is. Late nights, mysterious phone calls, credit card charges, he can't explain." She sat back down and gestured for me to do the same. "I assume your wife is involved?" I pulled out a folder with copies of the messages and photos. "Mara Solon, museum curator. They've been meeting at the Harbor View Hotel for the past 6 months." Reina examined the evidence with the detached professionalism of someone who'd spent years reviewing legal documents. When she finished, she closed the folder and looked at me directly. "What do you want from me, Mr. Carven?" "Justice. For both of us." "And what does justice look like to you?" I leaned forward. "There's a museum gala next Friday night. Big donors, city council members, all the people who matter in this town. Quinn will be there as Mara's guest. I think it's time they faced some consequences for their choices." A slow smile spread across Reina's face. "I like the way you think. What did you have in mind?" We spent the next hour planning. Reina, it turned out, had been gathering her own evidence for months. Financial records, business communications, even photos from a private investigator she'd hired. Between the two of us, we had enough ammunition to destroy both Quinn and Mara's reputations permanently. "There's one more thing," Reina said as we prepared to leave. "Quinn's been bragging about that civic center contract. Says it's a sure thing because he has inside information about the bidding process." "From Mara?" "That would be my guess. She's been feeding him details about city planning meetings, zoning changes, anything that might give him an advantage." Reina's expression hardened. "It's not quite fraud, but it's definitely unethical. The kind of thing that could cost him the contract if the right people found out." Perfect. I had the pieces I needed. Now it was time to set the trap. That evening I called Derek and asked him to meet me at the construction site where Quinn's company was working on a new office building. We arrived after hours, when the place was deserted except for security lights and the distant sound of traffic. "What exactly are we doing here?" Derek asked as we walked through the skeletal framework of the building. "Research," I said, examining the foundation work. Even in the dim light, I could see what Derek had been talking about. Cheap concrete, substandard rebar, corners cut everywhere. "You're right about the quality issues. Told you. Guy's a hack with good PR." Derek kicked at a pile of debris. "So what's the plan?" I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. "We're going to make sure the right people know about Quinn's work habits, starting with the building inspector." "You sure about this, Brooks? Going after a guy like Quinn, he's got connections." "So do I, and mine are about to become a lot more motivated." We spent an hour documenting everything we could find. Poor workmanship, safety violations, evidence of the corner cutting that Derek had mentioned. By the time we left, I had enough material to cause serious problems for Quinn's company. The next morning, I sent anonymous tips to the building inspector, the city planning office, and 3 different reporters who covered construction news for local papers. Not enough to destroy Quinn immediately, but enough to start asking uncomfortable questions. Then I called Mara's museum and asked to speak with the director. "Dr. Patricia Henley," came the crisp voice on the other end. "Dr. Henley, this is Brooks Carven. I'm calling about some concerns regarding the museum's upcoming expansion project." "Oh yes, you're Mara's husband. She's mentioned you. What kind of concerns?" "I've come across some information suggesting there may be ethical issues with the bidding process, conflicts of interest, that sort of thing. I thought you should be aware." A long pause. "That's a serious allegation, Mr. Carven. Do you have evidence to support it?" "I do, and I think it would be best if we discussed it in person. Are you available this afternoon?" Dr. Henley agreed to meet me at 2 o'clock. I spent the morning preparing my presentation, organizing the evidence in a way that would be impossible to ignore or dismiss. By the time I walked into her office, I was ready for war. Patricia Henley was exactly what you'd expect from a museum director, sophisticated, intellectual, and absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting her institution's reputation. She listened to my presentation without interruption, occasionally asking pointed questions about sources and verification. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and steepled her fingers. "This is extremely troubling, Mr. Carven. If what you're telling me is true, it represents a serious breach of ethics on Miss Solin's part. I understand this puts you in a difficult position. Indeed it does. Mara is a valued member of our staff, but the museum's integrity must come first." She stood up. "I'll need to investigate this thoroughly. In the meantime, I think it would be best if Mara took some time off, administrative leave while we sort this out." Perfect. By the time Mara got home that evening, she'd be unemployed and under investigation, and she'd have no idea that I was behind it. I drove home with a sense of satisfaction I hadn't felt in months. The pieces were falling into place exactly as I'd planned. Friday's gala was going to be very interesting indeed. Friday evening arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made Port Standish look like a postcard. The museum gala was being held at the Harbor View Hotel, the same place where Mara and Quinn had been conducting their affair. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent the afternoon getting ready, choosing my best suit, and mentally rehearsing what was about to happen. Reina and I had coordinated our arrival times, our seating arrangements, even our conversation topics. Every detail had been planned with military precision. Mara had left early to help with setup, still unaware that she was walking into a trap. She'd been tense all week since Dr. Henley had placed her on administrative leave, but she was trying to maintain appearances. Tonight was supposed to be her big moment, introducing Quinn to the museum's major donors and cementing their professional relationship. Instead, it was going to be her public destruction. I arrived at 7:30, fashionably late, but not suspiciously so. The hotel's ballroom was filled with Port Standish's elite, politicians, business leaders, old money families who'd been supporting the museum for generations. I spotted Mara across the room, radiant in a black evening gown, chatting with a group of donors. Quinn was beside her, looking every inch the successful architect in his tailored tuxedo. They had no idea what was coming. Reina arrived 15 minutes later, and I have to admit, she made an entrance. Stunning in a deep blue dress that probably cost more than most people's cars, she moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who belonged there. When she spotted me near the bar, she smiled and walked over. "Mr. Carven," she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "What a pleasant surprise. I didn't expect to see you here." "Mrs. Favren," I replied, playing my part. "The pleasure is mine. You look absolutely beautiful tonight." We made small talk for a few minutes, gradually drawing attention from other guests. In a town like Port Standish, seeing two attractive, successful people together was instant gossip fuel. I could see heads turning, whispered conversations starting. Across the room, Mara's face had gone white. She was staring at us with undisguised shock, clearly trying to figure out who Reina was and why I was talking to her. Quinn, meanwhile, looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Shall we find our table?" Reina asked, loud enough for half the room to hear. "Of course. I believe we're seated together." That was a lie, of course. I'd arranged for us to be seated at a prominent table near the front of the room where everyone could see us. As we walked through the crowd, I could feel Mara's eyes burning into my back. The dinner portion of the evening passed slowly, with me and Reina playing the perfect couple. We laughed at each other's jokes, shared stories about our work, and generally acted like two people who were very much enjoying each other's company. The gossip mill was working overtime. Meanwhile, Mara was clearly falling apart. She kept glancing over at our table, her conversations becoming more strained and distracted. Quinn wasn't much better. He'd barely touched his food and kept checking his phone like he was expecting bad news. The real fireworks started during the auction. Dr. Henley was on stage, encouraging bids for a weekend at a donor's vacation home in Bar Harbor, when Mara suddenly appeared at our table. Her face was flushed, her hands shaking with barely contained rage. "Brooks," she hissed, trying to keep her voice down. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I looked up at her with innocent surprise. "Enjoying the auction. This vacation package sounds lovely, don't you think, Reina?" Mara's eyes snapped to Reina, then back to me. Who is she? This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment when everything I'd planned would come together in perfect, devastating harmony. I stood up slowly, making sure my voice would carry to the nearby tables. "Mara, I'd like you to meet Reina Favren. Reina, this is my wife, Mara Solon." Reina smiled coldly and extended her hand. "Oh, I know exactly who Ms. Solon is. We have so much to discuss." Mara's face went from flushed to pale in an instant. She looked back and forth between us, clearly trying to process what was happening. "I don't understand." "Then let me clarify," Reina said, reaching into her purse and pulling out a manila folder. "I'm Quinn Vossin's wife, and these are copies of every hotel receipt, every text message, and every photograph documenting your affair with my husband over the past 6 months." The words hit Mara like a physical blow. She staggered backward, her hand going to her throat. Around us, conversations were stopping as people began to notice the drama unfolding at our table. I don't know what you're talking about, Mara stammered. Reina opened the folder and pulled out one of the photos, the one I'd found on the burner phone, showing Mara and Quinn in the hotel room. She held it up just long enough for Mara to see, then put it back in the folder. "We're finalizing everything," I said calmly, echoing the words that would become the title of this whole story. "The divorce papers, the financial settlements, the evidence packets for your respective employers." Mara's legs seemed to give out. She grabbed the back of a nearby chair for support, her face now completely white. "Brooks, please, can we talk about this privately? I think we're past private conversations, don't you?" I gestured toward the crowd of onlookers, many of whom were now openly staring at our little drama. "After all, you've been conducting your private business quite publicly." That's when Quinn appeared, pushing through the crowd with panic written all over his face. He'd obviously seen what was happening and had come to try to salvage the situation. "Reina," he said breathlessly, "what are you doing here?" His wife turned to look at him with cold fury. "Hello, darling. I was just showing Miss Solon some vacation photos. Would you like to see?" Quinn's face crumpled. He looked around at the crowd of witnesses, at Mara clutching the chair like a lifeline, at me standing there with a satisfied smile. In that moment, I think he realized that his carefully constructed life was about to come crashing down. "This isn't the place for this," he said weakly. "Isn't it?" Reina stood up, still holding the folder. "I think it's the perfect place. After all, these are your friends, your colleagues, your potential clients. Don't they deserve to know what kind of man they're dealing with?" The crowd was growing larger now, drawn by the unmistakable scent of scandal. I could see Dr. Henley on the stage, trying to continue the auction while clearly being distracted by the commotion. Glenna Marsh was pushing through the crowd, probably trying to reach Mara, but it was too late for damage control. The bomb had been dropped, and the fallout was spreading through the room like wildfire. Security appeared then. 2 large men in dark suits who'd been stationed discreetly around the ballroom. They approached our table with professional calm. "Is there a problem here?" one of them asked. "No problem," I said pleasantly. "Just some friends catching up. But I think Miss Solon and Mr. Vossin were just leaving." Mara looked at me with something approaching hatred. "This isn't over, Brooks." "Yes," I said quietly, so only she could hear. "It is." Security escorted them out, along with the folder full of evidence that Reina had thoughtfully left on the table for anyone who wanted a closer look. As they disappeared through the ballroom doors, the crowd slowly began to disperse, buzzing with excited conversation. I sat back down and picked up my wine glass. "Well," I said to Reina, "that went better than expected." She smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her all evening. "Indeed it did, though I suspect the real entertainment is just beginning." She was right. By morning, the story would be all over Port Standish. By Monday, both Mara and Quinn would be dealing with consequences they'd never imagined, and I would be free to start rebuilding my life on my own terms. The auction continued, but I wasn't really paying attention anymore. I'd accomplished what I came here to do. Justice had been served, and it tasted better than I'd expected. The weekend that followed the gala was a masterclass in social destruction. Port Standish's gossip network worked with the efficiency of a Swiss watch, spreading the story of Mara and Quinn's public humiliation to every corner of the town. By Sunday morning, I couldn't buy coffee without someone asking me about that business at the museum thing. I spent Saturday morning in my workshop, finally finishing the cabinet I'd been refinishing the night I found Mara's burner phone. There was something satisfying about completing projects, about seeing things through to their proper conclusion. Zane called around noon with an update. The building inspector hit Quinn's construction site first thing Friday morning, found enough violations to shut down the project indefinitely. Word is the city's reviewing all his current contracts. And the Civic Center bid? Withdrawn. His company released a statement about focusing on current projects, but everyone knows what really happened. Zane paused. Brooks, you sure you want to push this all the way? The guy's pretty much finished already. I thought about that for a moment. Quinn Vossin had spent months sneaking around with my wife, using her connections to cheat the system, and probably laughing about how easily he'd fooled the blue-collar guy who didn't understand their sophisticated world. Yeah, I said. I'm sure. Monday brought the final phase of my plan. I'd arranged to meet Derek at the Hammered Nail for lunch, but I had one stop to make first. The Port Standish Herald occupied a converted warehouse downtown, the kind of place where real journalism still happened despite budget cuts and corporate consolidation. I found the business reporter, Sarah Chen, at her desk surrounded by coffee cups and stacks of documents. Mr. Carven, she said, looking up from her computer, I got your message about Quinn Vossin. You said you had information about his business practices? I handed her a folder containing everything Zane and I had compiled. Financial records, construction photos, documentation of the corner cutting and safety violations. I think you'll find this interesting reading. She flipped through the documents, her eyebrows rising higher with each page. This is pretty damaging stuff. Are you willing to go on the record? Absolutely, but there's more. I pulled out a second folder, this one containing the evidence of Quinn's relationship with Mara and how he'd used her museum connections to gain inside information about city planning decisions. I think the public has a right to know what kind of person they've been trusting with their tax dollars. Sarah Chen was a good reporter. She asked tough questions, demanded verification for every claim, and made it clear that she'd be checking every detail before publication. But I could see the excitement in her eyes. This was the kind of story that made careers. When can I expect the article? I asked as I prepared to leave. Wednesday's edition, front page, above the fold. She smiled grimly. Mr. Vossin's going to have a very bad week. From the Herald offices, I drove to the Hammered Nail, where Derek was waiting with a beer and a grin. You look like the cat that ate the canary, he said as I sat down. Just taking care of some unfinished business. I ordered a sandwich and a beer. How's the construction gossip mill treating our friend Quinn? Like a plague victim. Nobody wants to work with him. Nobody wants to be associated with him. Word is he's trying to sell his company, but who's going to buy a firm with that kind of reputation? Perfect. Quinn's professional destruction was proceeding exactly as planned, but I wasn't done yet. Derek, you still got contacts at the marina? Sure. Why? I heard Quinn keeps a boat down there. Expensive one, from what I understand. Derek's grin got wider. You thinking what I think you're thinking? Nothing illegal, just educational. We finished our lunch and drove to the marina, where Derek's friend Tony managed the docks. Tony was happy to point out Quinn's boat, a 30-foot cabin cruiser that probably cost more than most people's houses. Nice boat, Derek observed. Be a shame if something happened to it. Nothing's going to happen to it, I said. But I think Quinn should know that people are watching, that his actions have consequences. I pulled out my phone and took several photos of the boat, making sure to capture the registration numbers and any identifying details. Then I sent them to Quinn's business phone with a simple message. Nice boat. Hope you can afford the payments. The response came back within minutes. What do you want? I typed back. Just wanted you to know I'm thinking about you. Have a great day. Tuesday brought news that Mara had been officially terminated from the museum. Dr. Henley released a carefully worded statement about ethical violations and breach of public trust that left no doubt about the seriousness of the situation. Mara's career in the art world was effectively over. I felt a moment of something that might have been sympathy. Then I remembered the months of lies, the gaslighting, the way she'd made me feel like I was crazy for suspecting what was right in front of my face. The sympathy passed. Wednesday's Herald was everything Sarah Chen had promised. The story dominated the front page, local architects' ethics under fire. It detailed Quinn's construction shortcuts, his use of inside information from Mara, and the affair that had compromised both their professional integrity. The accompanying editorial called for a full investigation of city contracting procedures. By Thursday, Quinn's company had filed for bankruptcy. By Friday, he'd put his house on the market. I was in my office that afternoon when Zane knocked and entered with a visitor. Reina Favren looked as composed as ever, but I could see satisfaction in her eyes. "Mr. Carven," she said, taking a seat, "I wanted to thank you for your assistance this week." "Thank me?" "Quinn signed the divorce papers this morning. He's also agreed to a very generous settlement that includes full custody of our children." She smiled coldly. It's amazing how cooperative people become when they're facing complete social and professional ruin. "And Mara?" "Has been remarkably quiet. I suspect she's finally realized the scope of what she's lost." Reina stood up. "I also wanted you to know that I've recommended your company to several of my clients. Good work deserves to be rewarded." After she left, I sat in my office watching the sun set over Port Standish. The construction cranes were still there, still reaching toward the sky, but the landscape had changed. Quinn Vossin's name would come down from the buildings he'd designed. New architects would finish his projects. The city would move on. And so would I. That evening, I drove home to the brownstone that was finally, truly mine again. I'd had the locks changed, the security system updated, and all traces of Mara removed. The house felt different now, not empty, but clean, like a building that had been stripped down to its foundation and was ready for something new. I went down to my workshop and opened a beer. On the workbench sat the cabinet I'd finished, solid oak, perfect joints, built to last for generations. It was the kind of work I was proud of, the kind of thing that would outlive the people who'd tried to tear me down. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Probably Mara trying one last time to salvage something from the wreckage of her life. I deleted it without reading it. Some buildings are worth renovating. Others need to be demolished completely so you can start fresh. I'd spent the last few weeks learning the difference. I raised my beer in a toast to the empty workshop, to the house that was mine again, to the future that stretched out